This region of the world goes by many different names, but the ones we hear most often are the Middle East or West Asia. Regardless of what you call it, this is an incredibly vast area, if you exclude Russia. The Middle East is larger than the rest of Europe combined. Much like Europe, it is also a place of immense diversity. There are deep divides in religious beliefs here, distinct differences between ethnic groups, and a wide variety of languages and dialects. Not to mention the distribution of strategic resources, like oil and gas, which varies greatly, making some areas far wealthier than others. In many ways, the Middle East is very similar to Europe or other major global regions. But it is fundamentally different in at least one key respect, something most of us have felt deeply throughout our lives. The Middle East has long been extremely volatile. Violence is frequent. There are many reasons for this, but part of it is directly related to how the borders of the Middle East were drawn. These are the national borders usually shown on a world map. But looking at it this way makes it hard to explain why these borders are so problematic. If you overlay the borders onto a map of religious distribution, you can see it clearly. In many places, national borders do not match religious distribution at all. Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen are split into zones of Sunni and Shia Muslims. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia and Iran are relatively homogeneous. Switching to an ethnic map, you will find, once again, that the national borders in these same places remain severely misaligned with ethnic distribution. As seen on this map, Syria and Iraq are divided between Arabs and Kurds. The internal divisions in Turkey, Iran, and Afghanistan are even more complex. Finally, let's replace the ethnic map with a linguistic map, specifically looking at the various dialects of Arabic. Each region is a relatively independent cultural unit within the larger Arab world. First, Egyptian Arabic is entirely concentrated within the borders of Egypt. Similarly, Moroccan Arabic is almost entirely within Morocco, and Algerian Arabic is almost entirely within Algeria. In these three examples, the entire linguistic group is basically contained within the borders of a real nation. The Iraqi dialect, the Levantan dialect, the North Mesopotamian dialect, the Gulf dialect, and the Naidi dialect are all spread across several countries. Meanwhile, countries like Iraq, Syria, and Jordan are essentially a patchwork of different dialects, since most political borders in the Middle East do not match religious, ethnic, or even linguistic realities. Why do these borders even exist? Why were they drawn this way in the first place? The answer is simple. They were deliberately designed this way by outside powers. The goal was to maximize chaos and instability. This is the core problem with the Middle East's borders. Before the 20th century, one of the oldest borders in Asia and the Middle East was born during that era. This border was established in 1639 between the rival Ottoman Empire and the Safavid Persian Empire. It served as the boundary between their territories, but it was not perfect. Mountains usually provide a clear and simple boundary to divide ethnic groups, empires, and nations. This border generally followed that principle until it reached Khuzestan province in modern-day Iran. Geographically, Khuzestan sits on an open plain west of the mountain ranges that form the rest of Iran's western border. Ethnically, the residents here are predominantly Arab, not Persian. When it was ceded to Persia in the 17th century, this didn't seem to matter much. But in the 20th and 21st centuries, with the rise of Arab nationalism and identity, it became a major issue. Even more serious, the Turkish and Persian cartographers of the time could never have predicted what conflicts would arise. From placing Khuzestan on the eastern side of the border, Khuzestan is extremely rich in oil. In fact, this single province contributes 57% of Iran's total oil production. This means Controlling this area is vital to the functioning of Iran's economy today. Even though it is a predominantly Arab province, seizing Khuzestan, its Arab population, and its oil resources was the primary motivation for Iraq's invasion of Iran in the 1980s. And keeping those oil resources was the core reason Iran fought to the death, to defend the territory. However, the issue of Shia Arabs living in Khuzestan, on the Shia Persian side, is far from the biggest problem with Middle Eastern borders. In the late 20th century, the Ottoman Empire allied with Germany in World War I. By 1918, the war was lost. This empire that once spanned the entire Middle East collapsed, and the victors hungrily carved up its land. In the Treaty of Versailles, Germany, seen as the instigator of the war, lost only about 15% of its territory. But the Allied powers initially planned to take over almost 100% of the Ottoman Empire's land. Britain took this large section, France took this one, and Italy took this piece. Istanbul was under international administration. Leaving the rest of Turkey to shrink into a small rump state. This was clearly too harsh. The Allies were moving too fast. The treaty setting these borders was signed by Turkey, but never ratified. When the harsh terms were made public, the Turkish people were outraged. The Turkish government stripped the signatories of their citizenship. Following a 3-year war of independence against the Allies, they eventually won, securing a much stronger negotiating position. A new treaty was signed and went into effect, largely establishing the borders of the modern Republic of Turkey. The European powers were essentially driven out of mainland Turkey. However, almost all the Ottoman lands outside modern Turkey's borders were ruthlessly partitioned. And a secret treaty signed in while the war was still ongoing. Britain and France agreed to divide the Middle East. Britain took Mesopotamia, Palestine, and France took control of northern Syria and most of the Levant. The line between their colonies was drawn here. It became known as the Sykes-Picot Line, named after the British and French diplomats who signed the agreement. This line between former British and French colonies remains largely the border between Iraq and Syria today, 100 years later. As we all know, this border has caused severe problems over the past decade. The Sykes-Picot Line was created purely to divide British and French interests in the region. The benefit of the local residents was never considered. It crudely cut through several Arabic dialect regions, splitting the same linguistic group across 2 countries for over a century. But other colonial borders drawn by Europeans were even more problematic. Iraq's borders intentionally forced Shia Arabs, Sunni Arabs, and Kurds together into the same country. Shias make up the majority of the population and control almost all the oil in the south. Yet, the minority, Sunnis, dominated the Ba'ath Party that ruled Iraq from the 1960s until the fall of Saddam in 2003. Syria's borders were likewise drawn by France, stuffing Shia Sunni Arabs and Kurds into a single, divided nation. Despite being a minority, the Alawites, an offshoot of Shia Islam, have effectively ruled the entire country for the last 40 years. Lebanon, though ethnically mostly Arab, was also designed as a country, sharply divided between Sunnis, Shias, and Christians. All these divisions were engineered by Anglo-French friendship to keep the local populations fractured, preventing them from uniting against their colonial masters. The British and French eventually left, but the borders they left behind, designed to foster ethnic strife, remain. It is therefore no surprise that the Middle East has been so exceptionally volatile in the years since. Iraq's invasions of Iran and Kuwait both stemmed from unresolved border disputes. Kuwait was a British colony until the 1970s, and Iraq had always insisted that Kuwait rightfully belonged to it. The Lebanese Civil War of the 1980s, the Syrian civil wars of the 2010s and 2020s, and the expansion of ISIS across the Sykes-Picot line, all erupted around the terrible borders drawn by Britain and France that fractured religious, ethnic, and linguistic groups. This is why the borders in the Middle East are so bad. They were designed to be bad from the very beginning. The consequences of those decisions continue to cause immense instability and loss of life today. Realizing this, some geopolitical scholars have drawn hypothetical maps showing how Middle Eastern borders might be redrawn in the future. This map, produced by Columbia University, gives us a glimpse of how tension and instability in Iraq and Syria could lead to these two countries splitting into four new nations, aligning more logically with religious, ethnic, and linguistic boundaries. In this hypothetical scenario, the southeast would be a Shia Arab state. The western Mediterranean coast would be an Alawite Shia Arab state. Between the two would be a Sunni Arab state, and to the north would be an independent Kurdish state. Whether such a massive redrawing of the map will occur in the Middle East's future, only time will tell.